Hey guys, Sam from Manfa's Makes. Happy Saturday. Hope you're having a fabulous weekend so far. Thank you once again for stopping over, and I hope you're looking forward to story time. So, if you are new here, this is my weekend segment that I do on a Saturday and a Sunday, and it is where I read you stories from this book here, which is Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales. I do 2, 3, maybe 4 stories, just depending on how long they are. Just to remind you all, any themes or messages or morals or anything like that, opinions from the authors are the author's own. I am literally just reading the words off the page, so I am not saying I endorse any of the above. I am just having some fun, chilling out and reading you these stories as the weekends go by. So, if you haven't heard any of the other stories, they are in a playlist on my channel. And a little while ago, I also read to you The Wizard of Oz, and that is in a playlist also. So, if you're looking for an audio story, then maybe you should check those out. So, shall we get started? We are starting today on story 48, which is called Old Sultan. A farmer once had a faithful dog called Sultan who had grown old and lost all his teeth so that he could no longer hold anything tight. One day the farmer was standing with his wife before the door and said, "Tomorrow I intend to shoot old Sultan. He is no longer of any use." His wife, who felt pity for the faithful beast, answered, "He has served us so long and been so faithful that we might well give him his keep." "Eh? What?" said the man. "You are not very sharp. He has not a tooth left in his mouth, and not a thief is afraid of him. Now he may be off. If he has served us, he has been well fed for it." The poor dog, who was lying stretched out in the sun not far off, had heard everything, and was sorry that the morrow was to be his last day. He had a good friend, the wolf, and he crept out in the evening into the forest to him and complained of the fate that awaited him. "Listen, friend," said the wolf. "Be of good cheer. I will help you out of your trouble. I have thought of something. Tomorrow, early in the morning, your master is going with his wife to make hay, and they will take their little child with them, and no one will be left behind in the house. While at work, they always lay the child under the hedge in the shade. You lay yourself there too, just as if you wish to guard it. Then I will come out of the wood and carry off the child. You must rush swiftly after me as if you would rescue it from me. I will let it fall, and you will take it back to its parents, who will think that you have saved it and will be far too grateful to do you any harm. On the contrary, you will be in high favour, and they will never let you want for anything again." The plan pleased the dog, and it was carried out just as it was arranged. The father screamed when he saw the wolf running across the field with his child, but when old Sultan brought it back, then he was full of joy and stroked him and said, "Not a hair of yours shall be hurt. You shall be well fed as long as you live." And to his wife he said, "Go home at once and make old Sultan some soup that he will not have to chew, and bring the pillow from my bed. I will give him that to lie upon." Hereforth old Sultan was as well off as he could wish to be. Soon afterwards the wolf visited him, and was pleased that everything had succeeded so well. "But now," said he, "you will just turn a blind eye if, when I have a chance, I carry off one of your master's fat sheep. Sorry, tongue-tied. "Do not reckon upon that," answered the dog. "I will remain true to my master. I cannot agree to that." The wolf, who thought that this could not be spoken in earnest, came creeping about in the night and was going to take away the sheep. But the farmer, to whom the faithful Sultan had told the wolf's plan, caught him and beat his hide soundly with the flail. The wolf had to flee, but he cried out to the dog, "Wait a bit, you scoundrel, you shall pay for this." The next morning the wolf sent the boar to challenge the dog to come out into the forest so that they might settle the affair. Old Sultan could find no one to stand by him but a cat with only 3 legs, and as they went out together the poor cat limped along, and at the same time stretched out her tail into the air with pain. The wolf and his friend were already on the spot appointed, but when they saw their enemy coming they thought that he was bringing a sabre with him, for they mistook the outstretched tail of the cat for one. And when the poor beast hopped on its 3 legs they could only think every time that it was picking up a stone to throw at them. So they were both afraid. The wild boar crept into the thicket, and the wolf jumped up a tree. The dog and the cat, when they came up, wondered that there were no one to be seen. The wild boar, however, had not been able to hide himself altogether, and one of his ears was still to be seen. While the cat was looking carefully about, the boar moved his ear. The cat, who thought it was a mouse moving there, jumped upon it and bit it hard. The boar made a fearful noise and ran away, crying out, "The guilty one is up in the tree." The dog and cat looked up and saw the wolf, who was ashamed of having shown himself so timid, and made friends with the dog again. Do apologise, I tripped over a few of the words there. It is getting late, so apologies. So the next story, story 49, is called The 6 Swans. Once upon a time, a certain king was hunting in a great forest, and he chased a wild beast so eagerly that none of his attendants could follow him. When evening drew near, he stopped and looked around him, and then he saw that he had lost his way. He sought a way out, but could find none. Then he perceived an aged woman with a head which nodded perpetually, who came towards him, but she was a witch. "Good woman," said he to her, "can you not show me the way through the forest?" "Oh yes, Lord King," she answered, "that I certainly can, but on one condition, and if you do not fulfil that, you will never get out of the forest, and will die of hunger in it." "What kind of condition is it?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is as beautiful as anyone in the world, and well deserves to be your wife, and if you will make her your queen, I will show you the way out of the forest." In the anguish of his heart the king consented, and the old woman led him to her little hut where her daughter was sitting by the fire. She received the king as if she had been expecting him, and he saw that she was very beautiful, but still she did not please him, and he could not look at her without secret horror. After he had taken the maiden up on his horse, the old woman showed him the way, and the king reached his royal palace again, where the wedding was celebrated. The king had already been married once, and had by his first wife 7 children, 6 boys and a girl, whom he loved better than anything else in the world. As he now feared that the stepmother might not treat them well, and even do them some injury, he took them to a lonely castle which stood in the middle of a forest. It lay so concealed, and the way was so difficult to find, that he himself would not have found it if a wise woman had not given him a ball of yarn with wonderful properties. When he threw it down before him, it unrolled itself and showed him his path. The king, however, went so frequently away to his dear children that the queen observed his absence. She was curious and wanted to know what he did when he was quite alone in the forest. She gave a great deal of money to his servants, and they betrayed the secret to her and told her likewise of the ball which alone could point out the way. And now she knew no rest until she had learnt where the king kept the ball of yarn, and then she made little shirts of white silk, and as she had learnt the art of witchcraft from her mother, she sewed a charm inside them. And when the king had ridden off to hunt, she took the little shirts and went into the forest, and the ball showed her the way. The children, who saw from a distance that someone was approaching, thought that their dear father was coming to them, and full of joy ran to meet him. Then she threw one of the little shirts over each of them, and no sooner had the shirts touched their bodies than they were changed into swans and flew away over the forest. The queen went home quite delighted, and thought she had got rid of her stepchildren, but the girl had not run out with her brothers, and the queen knew nothing about her. Next day the king went to visit his children, but he found no one but the little girl. "Where are your brothers?" asked the king. "Alas, dear father," she answered, "they have gone away and left me alone." And she told him that she had seen from her little window how her brothers had flown away over the forest in the shape of swans, and she showed him the feathers which they had let fall in the courtyard and which she had picked up. The king mourned, but he did not think that the queen had done this wicked deed, and since he feared that the girl would also be stolen away from him, he wanted to take her away with him. But she was afraid of her stepmother, and begged the king to let her stay just this one night more in the forest castle. The poor girl thought, "I can no longer stay here. I will go and seek my brothers." And when night came, she ran away and went straight into the forest. She walked the whole night long, and next day also without stopping, until she could go no further for weariness. Then she saw a forest hut and went into it, and found a room with 6 little beds, but she did not venture to get into one of them, but crept under one and lay down on the hard ground, intending to pass the night there. Just before sunset, however, she heard a rustling and saw 6 swans come flying in at the window. They alighted on the ground and blew at each other, and blew all the feathers off, and their swan skins stripped off like a shirt. Then the maiden looked at them and recognised her brothers, was glad, and crept forth from beneath the bed. The brothers were not less delighted to see their little sister, but their joy was of short duration. "Here, can you not abide?" they said to her. "This is a shelter for robbers. If they come home and find you, they will kill you." "But can you not protect me?" asked the little sister. "No," they replied, "only for 1/4 of an hour each evening can we lay aside our swan skins and have during that time our human form. After that we are once more turned into swans." The little sister wept and said, "Can you not be set free?" "Alas, no," they answered. "The conditions are too hard. For 6 years you may neither speak nor laugh, and in that time you must sew together 6 little shirts of star flowers for us. And if one single word falls from your lips, all your work will be lost." And when the brothers had said this, the 1/4 of an hour was over, and they flew out of the window again as swans. The maiden, however, firmly resolved to save her brothers, even if it should cost her her life. She left the hut, went into the middle of the forest, seated herself on a tree, and there passed the night. Next morning she went out and gathered star flowers and began to sew. She could not speak to anyone, and she had no inclination to laugh. She sat there and looked at nothing but her work. When she had already spent a long time there, it came to pass that the king of the country was hunting in the forest, and his huntsmen came to the tree on which the maiden was sitting. They called to her and said, "Who are you?" But she made no answer. "Come down to us," said they, "we will not do you any harm." She only shook her head. As they passed her further with questions, she threw her golden necklace down to them, and thought this would satisfy them. They, however, did not cease, and then she threw her girdle down to them, and as this also was to no purpose, her garters, and by degrees everything that she had on that she could do without, until she had nothing left but her shift. The huntsmen, however, did not let themselves be put off by that, but climbed the tree and fetched the maiden down and led her before the king. The king asked, "Who are you? What are you doing on the tree?" But she did not answer. He put the question in every language that he knew, but she remained as mute as a fish. As she was so beautiful, the king's heart was touched, and he was smitten with a great love for her. He put his mantle on her, placed her before him on his horse, and carried her to his castle. Then he had dressed her in rich garments, and she shone in her beauty like bright daylight, but no word could be drawn from her. He placed her by his side at the able, and her modest bearing and courtesy pleased him so much that he said, "She is the one whom I wish to marry, and no other woman in the world." And after some days he united himself to her. The king, however, had a wicked mother who was dissatisfied with this marriage, and spoke ill of the young queen. "Who knows," said she, "where she comes from? She is not worthy of a king." After a year had passed, when the king brought her first child into the world, the old woman took it away from her and smeared her mouth with blood as she slept. Then she went to the king and accused the queen of being a man-eater. The king would not believe it, and would not allow anyone to do her any injury. She, however, sat continually sewing at the shirts and cared for nothing else. The next time, when she again bore a beautiful boy, the false stepmother used the same treachery, but the king could not bring himself to give credit to her words. He said, "She is too pious and good to do anything of that kind. If she were not dumb and could defend herself, her innocence would come to light." But when the old woman stole away the newly born child for the 3rd time and accused the queen, who did not utter one word of defence, the king could do no otherwise than deliver her over to justice, and she was sentenced to suffer death by fire. When the day came for the sentence to be executed, it was the last day of the 6 years during which she was not to speak or laugh, and she had delivered her dear brothers from the power of the enchantment. The 6 shirts were ready, only the left sleeve of the 6th was missing. When therefore she was led to the stake, she laid the shirts on her arm, and when she stood up high and the fire was just going to be lighted, she looked around, and 6 swans came flying through the air towards her. Then she saw that she would be saved, and her heart leapt with joy. The swans swept towards her and sank down so that she could throw the shirts over them, and as they were touched by them, their swan skins fell off, and her brothers stood in their own bodily form before her, and were vigorous and handsome. The youngest only lacked his left arm and had in the place of it a swan's wing on his shoulder. They embraced and kissed each other, and the queen went to the king, who was greatly moved, and she began to speak and said, "Dearest husband, now I may speak and declare to you that I am innocent and falsely accused." And she told him of the treachery of the old woman who had taken away her 3 children and hidden them. Then, to the great joy of the king, they were brought there, and as a punishment the wicked stepmother was bound to the stake and burnt to ashes. But the king and the queen, with their 6 brothers, lived many years in happiness and peace. Okay, and the last story for today is story 50, The Sleeping Beauty, or Briar Rose. A long time ago there were a king and queen who said every day, "Ah, if only we had a child," but they never had one. But it happened that once when the queen was bathing, a frog crept out of the water onto the land and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled before a year has gone by. You shall have a daughter." What the frog had said came true, and the queen had a little girl who was so pretty that the king could not contain himself for joy and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kindred, friends and acquaintance, but also the wise women, in order that they might be kind and well disposed towards the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only 12 golden plates for them to eat out of, one of them had to be left at home. The feast was held with all manner of splendour, and when it came to an end, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the baby. One gave virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on with everything in the world that one can wish for. When 11 of them had made their promises, suddenly the 13th came in. She wished to avenge herself for not having been invited, and without greeting or even looking at anyone, she cried with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall, in her 15th year, prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying a word more, she turned round and left the room. They were all shocked, but the 12th, whose good wish still remained unspoken, came forward, and as she could not undo the evil sentence, but only soften it, she said, "It shall not be death, but a deep sleep of 100 years, into which the princess shall fall." The king, who wished to keep his dear child from the misfortune, gave orders that every spindle in the whole kingdom should be burned. Meanwhile, the gifts of the wise women came true for the young girl, for she was so beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise that everyone who saw her was bound to love her. It happened that on the very day she turned 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and the maiden was left in the palace quite alone. So she went round into all sorts of places, looked into rooms and bedchambers just as she liked, and at last came to an old tower. She climbed up the narrow winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it the door sprang open, and there in a little room sat an old woman with a spindle busily spinning her flax. "Good day, old dame," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing there?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. "What sort of thing is that rattles round so merrily?" said the girl, and she took the spindle and wanted to spin too. But scarcely had she touched the spindle when the magic decree was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. And in the very moment when she felt the prick, she fell down upon the bed that stood there and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and queen, who had just come home and had entered the great hall, began to go to sleep, and all of the court too. The horses too went to sleep in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons upon the roof, the flies on the wall, even the fire that was flaming on the hearth became quiet and slept. The roast meat left off frizzling, and the cook, who was just going to pull the hair of the kitchen boy because he had forgotten something, let him go and went to sleep. And the wind fell, and on the trees outside the castle not a leaf moved again. But round about the castle there began to grow a hedge of thorns, which every year became higher, and at last grew close up round the castle and all over it, so that there was nothing of it to be seen, not even the flag upon the roof. But the story of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for so the princess was named, went about the country, so that from time to time kings' sons came and tried to get through the thorny hedge into the castle. But they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as if they had hands, and the youths were caught in them, could not get loose again, and died a miserable death. After long, long years, a king's son came again to that country, and heard an old man talking about the briar hedge, and that a castle was said to stand behind it in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose had been asleep for 100 years, and that the king and queen and the whole court were asleep likewise. He had heard too from his grandfather that many kings' sons had already come and had tried to get through the thorny hedge, but they had remained sticking fast in it and had died a pitiful death. Then the youth said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man tried to dissuade him, but he did not listen to his words. But by this time the 100 years had just passed, and the day had come when Briar Rose was to awake again. When the king's son came near to the briar hedge, it was nothing but large and beautiful flowers, which parted from each other of their own accord and let him pass unhurt when they closed again behind him like a hedge. In the courtyard he saw the horses and the spotted hounds lying asleep. On the roof sat the pigeons with their heads under their wings, and when he entered the house the flies were asleep upon the wall. The cook in the kitchen was still holding out his hand to seize the boy, and the maid was sitting by the black hen which she was going to pluck. He went on further, and in the great hall he saw the whole of the court lying asleep, and up by the throne lay the king and queen. Then he went on still further, and all was so quiet that a breath could be heard. And at last he came to the tower and opened the door into the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awoke and looked at him quite sweetly. Then they went down together, and the king awoke, and the queen, and the whole court, and looked at each other in great astonishment. And the horses in the courtyard stood up and shook themselves, the hounds jumped up and wagged their tails, the pigeons on the roof pulled out their heads from under their wings, looked round and flew into the open country, the flies on the wall crept again, the fire in the kitchen burned up and flickered and cooked the meat, the roast began to turn and frizzle again, and the cook gave the boy such a box on the ear that he screamed, and the maid plucked the fowl ready for the spit. And then the marriage of the king's son with Briar Rose was celebrated with all splendour, and they lived contented to the end of their days. So there we have it, guys. That was 3 stories today. I will, of course, be back tomorrow with another few stories for you. Don't forget, if you haven't already, please do enter my super duper giveaway that is going on. You have until midnight UK time today, Saturday the 23rd of July, to get your entry in, because it is closing at midnight tonight, my time. So if you haven't gotten around to it, please do enter, because it is an absolutely fabulous giveaway, and I would hate for any of you to miss out. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday and the rest of your weekend to come. I will, of course, be by tomorrow with a few more stories to read to you, and I look forward to seeing you then. So as always, guys, stay safe, be kind, look after one another, get some good quality time in with your loved ones, and get some good quality crafty time in, and I will see you in the next one or around the YouTube streets. Love you guys. Bye.